somebody expendable. Then I'd make a deal, writing my own ticket because they'd figure I'd never collect. Did you hear about Operation Seed Corn? That was the underground railway that ran thousands of farmers out of occupied territory. Manpower was what finally broke Invader, improbable as it seems. Epidemics, desertions, overextended lines thinned that overwhelming combat strength, and every farmer spirited out of their hands equaled 10 casualties. I nodded. Well, I planned that with myself as director and sold it to Phillipson. I contemplated him. Just a big man in a trench coat and droop-brimmed hat, silhouetted against the lamplit mist. I said, "You directed seed corn out of a wheelchair, in enemy territory, and came back to get transplanted into another body? Man, you didn't tell Ferd a word of a lie when you said you were used to walking up to death." But there was more. Besides that dour Scots fortitude, where did he come by that high-hearted valor? He shrugged. You do what you can with what you've got. Those weren't the big adventures I was thinking about when I said that. I had a team behind me in those. I could only josh. I'd sure like to hear the caparoo then. He towed out his cigarette. You're the only person who's equipped for it. Maybe you'd get it, Willie. How do you mean? I kept an ICEG record. Not that I knew it was going to happen, just wanted proof if they gave me a deal and I pulled it off. Phillipson wouldn't renege, but generals were expendable. No one knew I had that transmitter in my temporal bone, and I rigged it to get a tape on my home receiver. Like to hear it? I said what anyone would and steered him back to quarters before he'd think better of it. This would be something. On the way, he filled in the background. Scott had been living out of hospital in a small apartment, enjoying as much liberty as he could manage. He had equipment so he could stump around, and an antique car specially equipped. He wasn't complimentary about them. Orthopedic products had to be unreliable, hard to service, unsightly, intricate, and uncomfortable. If they also squeaked and cut your clothes, fine. Having to plan every move with an eye on weather and a dozen other factors, he developed an uncanny foresight. Yet he had to improvise at a moment's notice. With life a continuous high-wire act, he trained every surviving fiber to precision, dexterity, and tenacity. Finally, he avoided help. Not pride, self-preservation. The compulsively helpful have rarely the wit to ask before rushing in to knock you on your face, so he learned to bide his time till the horizon was clear of beaming simpletons. Also, he found an interest in how far he could go. These qualities and the time he had for thinking begot seed corn. When he had it convincing, he applied to see General Phillipson, head of Regional Intelligence, a man with both insight and authority to make the deal, but also as tough as his post demanded. Scott got an appointment 2 weeks ahead. That put it early in April, which decreased the weather hazard, a major consideration in even a trip to the supermarket. What was Scott's grim consternation, then, when he woke on D-Day to find his windows plastered with snow under a driving wind, not mentioned in last night's forecast, of course. He could concoct a plausible excuse for postponement, which Phillipson was just the man to see through, or call help to get him to HQ, and have Phillipson bark, "Man, you can't even make it across town on your own power because of a little snow." No, come hell or blizzard, he'd have to go solo. Besides, when he faced the inevitable unexpected behind invader lines, he couldn't afford a precedent of having flinched now. He dressed and breakfasted with all the petty foresights that can mean the shaving of clearance in a tight squeeze, and got off with all the margin of time he could muster. In the apartment court he had a parking space by the basement exit, and for a wonder no freewheeling nincompoop had done him out of it last night. Even so, getting to the car door illustrated the ordeal ahead. The snow was the damp, heavy stuff that packs and glares. The streets were nasty, but he had the advantage of having learned restraint and foresight. HQ had been the post office, a ponderous red stone building filling a whole block. He had scouted it thoroughly in advance, outside and in, and scheduled his route to the general's office, allowing for minor hazards. Now he had half an hour extra for the unscheduled major hazard. But on arriving, he could hardly believe his luck. No car was yet parked in front of the building, and the walk was scraped clean and salted to kill the still falling flakes. No problems. He parked and began to unload himself quickly to forestall the elderly MP who hurried towards him. But as Scott prepared to thank him off, the man said, "Sorry, Mac. No one can park here this morning." Scott felt the chill of nemesis. Knowing it was useless, he protested his identity and mission. But, "Sorry, Major, but you'll have to park around back. They're bringing in the big computer. General himself can't park here. Them's orders." He could ask the sergeant to park the car, but the man couldn't leave his post, would make a to-do calling someone, and that was Phillipson's suite overlooking the scene. No dice. Go see what might be possible. But side and back parking were jammed with refugees from the computer, and so was the other side, and he came around to the front again. 5 minutes wasted. He thought searchingly. He could drive to a taxi lot, park there, and be driven back by taxi, disembark on the clean walk, and there you were. Of course he could hear Phillipson's, "Thought you drove your own car, huh?" and his own damaging excuses. But even out yonder you'd cut corners in emergency. It was all such a comfortable out. He relaxed. And relaxing saw his alternative. He was driving around the block again and noted the back entrance. This was not ground level because of the slope of ground. It faced a broad landing reached by a double flight of steps. These began on each side at right angles to the building and then turned up to the landing along the face of the wall. Normally, they were negotiable, but now, even had he found parking near them, he hadn't the chance of the celluloid cat in hell of even crossing the 10 feet of uncleaned sidewalk. You might as well climb an 80-degree, 50-foot wall of rotten ice. But there was always a way, and he saw it. The unpassable walk itself was an avenue of approach. He swung his car onto it at the corner and drove along it to the steps to park in the angle between steps and wall, and discovered a new shutout. He'd expected the steps to be a mean job in the raw wind that favored this face of the building, but a wartime janitor had swept them sketchily only down the middle, far from the balustrades he must use. By the balustrades, early feet had packed a semi-ice far more treacherous than the untouched snow, and the 2 bottom steps curved out beyond the balustrade. So, a sufficiently reckless alpinist might essay a cliff in a sleet storm and a gale, but he couldn't even try it if it began with an overhang. Still time for the taxi, and so, again Scott saw the way that was always there. Set the car so he could use its hood to heft up those first steps. Suddenly, his thinking metamorphosed. He faced not a miserable, unwarranted forlorn hope, but the universe as it was. Titanic pressure suit against the hurricanes of Jupiter and against a gutter freshet, life was always outclassed and always fought back. Proportions didn't matter, only mood. He switched on his ICEG to record what might happen. I auditioned it, but I can't disentangle it from what he told me. For example, in his words, "Multiply distances by 5, heights by 10, and slickness by 20." And in the playback, 30 chin-high ledges loaded with soft lard and only finger holds and toe holds. And you did it on stilts that began, not at your heels, at your hips. Add the hazard of helpful Hosea, "Here, let me give you a hand, Mac," grabbing a key arm and crashing down the precipice on top of you. Switching on the ICEG took his mind back to the snug apartment where its receiver stood. The armchair, books, desk of diverting work. It looked awful good, but life fought back, and always it found a way.